So I literally somehow got assigned a seat next to Vitalik on a random flight, not going from or going to a crypto conference. I'm like, okay, you're that Vitalik guy, aren't you? And he's like, yes. I'm like, give me your pitch of like why I should put my money into Ethereum. And he said, programmable money was like his pitch. And I'm like, okay, what is a good use of programmable money? And he's like, you could do like an escrow with it. We go through this conversation, we talk for like an hour, and then he like pulls his computer out and he starts coding, working on the code base, and I just kind of watching him for the rest of the flight. And I get off the plane and I tell my wife, I'm like, that was that guy who's like doing this Ethereum thing, but he's like so autistic, I don't think I'm going to invest because there's no way that like he will succeed coordinating a group of people to bring something to market.
This podcast is sponsored by Coin ATM Radar. When buying crypto with cash, an ATM is much more reliable and safer than meeting some random person in a random place. And unlike an exchange, which could freeze your account, you truly own all the crypto you buy. With Coin ATM Radar, you could find crypto ATMs and other services where you can buy and sell cryptocurrencies for cash. On their website, you can search by coin, address, if the ATM supports selling as well as buying, and you can also search by geo area, country, state, city. You can also check and compare actual current fees at different ATMs. If you want to find out more, head over to coinatmradar.com, which is coinatmradar.com.
Hey everyone, I'm joined at the New Hampshire Liberty Forum by the one and only Dr. K. We're going to have a fun little chat here. Why don't you go introduce yourself real quick for the viewers at home, as they say.
Yeah, so my name's Dr. K. I'm the co-founder of Quai Network. I've been in the crypto space since 2012 as a hobbyist, full-time since 2017. And I've been working full-time on Quai for the last 3 years, but it actually has a research history that goes back about 7. And the point is to create a scalable proof-of-work system that can function as a completely parallel monetary system, and that it has a store value, a unit of account, and a medium of exchange on a scalable, again, proof-of-work network.
Yeah, awesome. And we've been chatting about this quite a lot over the last day or so. And obviously we popped up on the same spaces and other things online the last couple of weeks. So it's definitely good to like, oh, here's that guy from the internet in person. So would you mind just like kind of going in a little bit about you journeying crypto and like how you got in, how and when you got in, like why did it resonate with you? And then how did that then lead you to where you're at now, where it's not just, oh, I'm going to just work on stuff like Bitcoin or Ethereum or other cryptos that are now that where you see, you know what, everyone's doing something wrong. There's this need. So that's kind of a lot of things, but yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So the intro to crypto, the very first time I actually heard about it, I want to say it was 2011. I heard about Bitcoin on NPR, or the Nipper, as I like to call it.
Interesting.
And they were talking about how people in the Valley were buying drugs with it online and how the price just crashed from $30 down to $3. I was like, interesting. Not because of the drugs, just because of digital money.
Yeah.
But I went and I looked into it, and at the time to buy it, the easiest way to buy it was to sort of like get a phone card that you could convert to an OK Pay card, that you could then get a Mt. Gox like voucher for and buy Bitcoin. And I was like, this is like this 3-step process. This is ridiculous. No one's ever going to use this.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So I kind of dropped it for a bit, but I started looking into it a little bit more just from like the construction, right? You know, and initially I looked at it and it kind of sounded a bit like a Ponzi scheme. And what ended up happening is I kind of learned how the money system worked. And back in this time, if you try to sort of understand on the internet that the Federal Reserve was indeed a private institution, even that was like hard to find in a reliable way. And
did you find any of that before kind of crypto, or did that start to happen during and after kind of?
Yeah, like that was, I found Bitcoin and like was just trying to understand it, which then caused me to try to understand the money system. Hadn't really thought about it before or understood it. But it took me maybe like a year, and I kind of wrapped my head around the money system. I'm like, oh, like if this is how the money system currently works, Bitcoin's probably a lot better than this.
Yeah, of course.
So that, then in that context, it starts to make sense. Certainly the libertarian underpinnings of it were very attractive to me, and that you create a money system which is independent of the state, and by using public-private key cryptography, you force all transactions to be voluntary. So I was like, this is cool. This is ultimately going to change things. I should buy some, even if it is ridiculous in terms of how to buy it now. That will improve in the future. So I got into it there, and then, started researching cryptos more. And, in the 2012 timeframe, right, you started getting like, altcoins and people trying to improve the system and experiment with different hash algorithms. And one of those coins was X11 at some point.
Yes.
Which was then Darkcoin, which then eventually turned into Dash. But there were other experiments like Vertcoin and Litecoin and all these fun things. And then eventually Bytecoin and Monero. And so I was doing my PhD at the time, and I was kind of maybe getting like a second PhD, if you will, in distributed systems and cryptography, just as an interest in these systems. But then when I got done with my PhD, I was like, I think I should work in crypto full time, because this will be an influential technology, ideally, that can positively affect society. So when I graduated, I went to work for Consensus, did a spin-out called Grid Plus. I designed and built the Lattice One hardware wallet. Principally, the problem there is, I think for crypto to work, you need to sort of deal with the UI problem associated with seed phrases, because you need self-custody to really like get the sort of broad censorship resistant properties.
Now, do you remember a time before seed phrases?
Before seed phrases?
Yeah, like before they became like a kind of the usual way the standardized backup, I guess. I kind of remember. I mean, obviously, when you go to like the QT wallet, the big old like the
So the super old school QT stuff, like early Bitcoin days, you would only get your addresses generated in time, and it was non-deterministic at that point in time. So like you had to go, and you had to be careful, because if you sent money to a wallet which you had already backed up, but the wallet hadn't generated the forward number of addresses, you could end up losing money, because they weren't using H2 wallets at the time. So like you actually had to like send money and then make sure you back up after you send money to ensure that you had all the private keys.
Seed phrases. Do you think they're kind of like dominant today? Would you say they're like 90% dominant as far as a backup form?
Yeah, I think seed phrases are still like the dominant form. I do think that there's becoming more and more card-based wallets, which was like kind of the point of Grid Plus. Is the way to get rid of seed phrases is to kind of use cards. One of the issues with seed phrases is, even if you have it, it's still not sort of secure in physical space. But if you can get it on a smart card, you can protect it with a PIN, and the properties of the smart card against that PIN can make it pretty secure. So sort of, your kind of optionality with a seed phrase is you can back it up and have it in a durable physical format, but then you have to sort of somehow keep that physical secret, which then, depending on how you want to do it, usually necessitates that you use a 25th word, which is also one of the most common ways that money is lost.
Oh yeah.
Is the loss of the 25th word. So I would say seed phrases that aren't card-based are still a challenge in the space, both from using them, figuring out how to safely store them, and then obviously dealing with loss to the 25th word. So I think card-based systems are like the way to do this, because you can get, security with pins, right? You can have a limited number of guesses on pins, which means you can also make, multiple physical backups, put them in different places, and not have to worry about your money going away if one of the backups is found, so to speak.
Yeah, and that's for like I started to get more serious about device security in the last couple of years, and I've started using like physical security keys for 2FA for like my my Twitter account, X account, my email, those kinds of things. And I have to say, like, I want idiot proof is maybe not the right word, but it's close to it, because I get a thing, I plug it in and I go on, it works. And then if I lose that, I got a couple more that I put in, and I hide those places. It's very intuitive to humans who, find shiny rock from the caveman days and put it under other tree. And if they lose that, there's another shiny. It's much more than like magic words and trying to understand. Like, I had so many people take a screenshot of their seed phrase as soon as they get their wallet. I'm just like,
yeah. So the simplest form of security to get good security that like most people can implement.
Yeah.
I reduce it to, you need to have one thing that you have and one thing that you know. And that is how like you create security that's robust to like 99.9% of things.
And then like a backup for those things. If you lose the one thing you have, maybe you have another thing you have. And if you don't,
or you can make replicates of it.
Exactly.
But the concept is generally one thing you have and one thing you know. That creates like a pretty good security that most people can sort of understand, right? So if it's a YubiKey or if it's a card, a YubiKey plus a password, or a card plus a pin phrase, like those are both like really good mechanisms that cover 99.9% of people at a level that they can deal with, is how I think about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I do see that happening a lot more. But so going back to where we were in the trajectory, so we get into like Bitcoin, some other coins. When you started to see these other projects other than science projects, kind of like, oh, this is cool that they're experimenting, as far as like actually stuff that was going to be useful or used, were you kind of in that headspace of like, well, Bitcoin's okay, but these things are kind of more interesting to me long term? Or were you just kind of still like, I'm focused on Bitcoin, but I like looking at these novelties?
So for a while, I like looking at these novelties, and it was really from a perspective of, can they gain some market share? And like, can I actually, like, very early on was thinking in Bitcoins. I know people think it's sats now. And that was like a weird transition for me, because like, I was like, looking at sats, what are these poor people doing?
Well, but to be clear about the sats thing, I don't think people think about that today much. I think there was a window of like 2021 through 2023 or 4 when the Lightning Network was really pushed, where people were like, oh, I got 20,000 sats on this.
Yeah, and I had like no idea what they were talking about.
I don't think that stuck. And I know that, for example, John Carvalho, of famous Making Roger Ver Flip 'em Off fame, is he's pushing a BIP to redefine Bitcoin as like, I don't know if it's a sat, but like,
down.
It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, so I kind of thought of it from that perspective. I'll actually share a story. I'm like probably one of the most unlucky people in crypto.
Wow. Well, listen, there's stiff competition.
Well, no, check this out. out. So I, in this time period, one of the experiments that came on my radar was Ethereum, and they were going to have an ICO. And this was after, like, I think it was like NXP did one.
So Ethereum wasn't the first ICO, dude.
No. I know it wasn't. Like there were like proof of burns, and there were different ones that kind of like happened before it.
As far as something that would be called an ICO, like officially, not ICO like, which was the first one? Because to my knowledge, the first one I remembered was Ethereum. I didn't look into it too much.
I want to say it was called NXP.
There was an NXT,
or was it NXT?
I don't know if that's
no.
It could be either one. Right?
I think that was it. Maybe it was NXT. It was a project out of the Northeast. It was like very like shady, but like they eventually ended up launching and it ended up doing well. So that got me like privy to the fact of ICOs. But before that, people were doing proof of burns. So they weren't raising money, but they were saying, if you burn your Bitcoin, like we'll issue this token. So so first it was like proof of burn, and then I want to say it was NXP or NXT, whichever one it was, did this thing where they did like an ICO, and then I was like, okay, I looked at that, I didn't do it, and then I started looking for like ICOs, and I found this Ethereum thing, and so I found it in like the years blend, but I want to say it was either like January of 14 or 15. that like I found out about it. And they were going to do this thing in the summer. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna like go 100 Bitcoin into this like this Ethereum thing.
Which 100 Bitcoin wasn't a ton of money back then.
No, it was like, maybe it was like 20, 30 grand or something, right? It wasn't like a ton of money. And so my wife wanted to go on spring break to California, and you're wondering like how this has anything to do with it.
Well, I can already see it's like the money hole right there.
Yeah. Okay. So check this out. So there's 3 people on this trip, like me, her, and one of her friends. We get on a plane to go to San Francisco, and this is before the ICO.
Yeah.
I get on this plane, and there's this lanky-looking autistic dude, and he's seated next to my assigned seat. Well, there's 3 seats, so there's 2 adjacent. I'm like, I want to sit next to that guy because I recognize him as the guy that's doing this Ethereum ICO. So it's Vitalik.
Oh, yeah.
So I literally somehow got assigned a seat next to Vitalik on a random flight, not going from or going to a crypto conference.
So far,
between
sounds lucky.
the time of January and summer, when I'm going to like put this money into this Ethereum ICO. So then I sit down next to him, and I'm like, okay, you're that Vitalik guy, aren't you? And he's like, yes. I'm like, give me your pitch of like why I should put my money into Ethereum. And he was like, he said programmable money was like his pitch. And I'm like, okay, what is a good use of programmable money? And he's like, you could do like an escrow with it. Right. And so anyway, we go through this conversation, we talk for like an hour, and then he like pulls his computer out and he starts coding, working on the code base, and I just kind of watching him for the rest of the flight. And I get off the plane, and I tell my wife, I'm like, that was that guy who's like doing this Ethereum thing, but he's like so autistic, I don't think I'm going to invest because there's no way that like he will succeed coordinating a group of people to bring something to market.
Yeah. And historically, that's a giant facepalm, but I have to steel man that sounds reasonable. That sounds like a reasonable take to be like, this guy's a smart kid, but like, how the hell is something going to form around this to make it work?
Yeah. So the short-sightedness was I didn't know who else was on the team at the time. And if I had known the other characters on the team, like that would have been a more informed decision. But I would potentially also say that the languishing of Ethereum in the development of its roadmap and being successful and making what economically seem like obviously poor decisions in their scaling roadmap and then having to go retrograde on them is potentially a manifestation of my assessment that I originally had on that flight.
So it's like full circle.
A little bit, but it also means that if I had put that money in when the token went to market, I would have had 2,000 Bitcoin.
Yeah, which is not bad.
Yeah.
You can do a lot with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's like the Bitcoin.
That's why I'm the unluckiest person in crypto, because this is completely different than like, oh, there's like a project that I saw and I didn't invest in for like whatever reason, because like I just didn't pull the trigger. I literally somehow, I calculated the odds. It's something like 1 in 60 million based off like the frequency of travel.
Yeah.
That I would have gotten a seat assigned next to Vitalik.
Yeah.
I like inverse won the lottery.
Yeah, you inverse won it and lost it, sort of.
Yeah.
But that's unfortunately, and it's very common, I guess, in crypto is a lot of very smart decisions lead to a stupid conclusion, you know, where he's like, this makes sense, this makes sense, this makes sense. But then there's that one missing thing that turns it to the other thing.
Right.
And so like, as you at least you've identified the missing thing, but you know, it could be that now could be that like Ethereum ends up round tripping back to like,
it did actually round trip. It did a 7-year 2-cycle round trip in terms of price with the recent dip.
Yeah.
So if you had Ethereum in Jan of 18 and you had it like this month, you did a 7-year round trip on price.
Yeah. Although I would say less if you consider the inflation of the US dollar in the meantime.
Oh, Yeah, fair.
So it's dipped a little bit more. So you'd have to like move back the time frame to be
inflation adjusted. You're down. Is your point?
Yes, if you took it right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at that time, 2015 or so, I was using Bitcoin a lot back then. It still worked. 2016 is where it started to have some issues with the scaling that, most people, it hit a boiling point in 2017, but 2016 was already having some issues. Where did that start to be like
a thing?
Where in your life, where you're either mentally seeing on the horizon, seeing Mike Hearn's rage quit letter, whatever it was, that started to be like, what's going on here?
So the interesting thing was I kind of went, and I wasn't like anti-Bitcoin. It was just like Ethereum was an opportunity with consensus to build these systems, and they were getting traction, they had funding, and smart contracting and DeFi like is interesting.
Yeah, of course.
So, I was kind of, in that camp, and I was just focused on how do we solve the UI UX problems to get broad adoption. So how do you do self-custody, right? That's why I was focusing on making wallets that make crypto look like debit cards. And, in the interim, there was sort of this like scaling war debate with SegWit that took place. That is probably when I started to lose long-term hope for Bitcoin, was the outcome of the scaling wars and sort of this like compromise with SegWit. It was obvious to me at the time that SegWit, one, was an increase in the block size, two, created a mal-designed market, and then it had dual pricing for storage, which ultimately took other people a couple of years to figure out with ordinals.
Yeah, of course.
But that was kind of when I started to say, okay, is this going to work? Like, does this process like manage correctly? Can this thing ultimately scale? And then there were other questions that were coming up about the traceability at that point in time as well.
Yeah, coming to a head now, but they started to pop up back then.
But back then, I mean, people started talking about the pseudo anonymity, and if you started like paying attention to the other sort of coins like Monero and Darkcoin at the time, there were serious arguments about how SATs revealed things, and if you don't have good address hygiene, how that ties everything back together. And I mean, at this point in time, obviously, I would say 99.5% of all transactions that are ever done on the Bitcoin blockchain are probably attributable to a person now by companies like Chain Analytics.
Yeah, of course.
So I would personally say there's no privacy on the Bitcoin blockchain. And it's probably worse privacy than you would get in something like just using a credit card from a bank issuer, because at least in that case, my records have to be discovered by subpoena, wherein my records on the Bitcoin blockchain are immutably recorded for everybody to see, and people can just pay a little money to Chainalytics to associate my addresses. So, those were the two things that kind of triggered it. One was the outcome of the scaling wars and how that took place, and then it not really giving a mechanism for scale. And then the other one being the sort of concerns around privacy. And that's when I started to say, okay, like Bitcoin is cool from an asset perspective, but it's fundamentally failing in the libertarian goal of creating peer-to-peer electronic cash.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's kind of interesting how that seems to be like the ordering of priorities for people who have kind of thought Bitcoin, at least Bitcoin alone, is not enough. It then tends to be scaling is a big thing. You have to be able to use it, at least scaling the usage of holding your own keys. And then privacy is the next one that is becoming super popular now, where you have a lot of like old school Bitcoin maximalists moving to Monero now, for example. And then the programmability or the smart contract thing, it's not as widespread, but it's still a kind of a thing. So that's kind of like the trifecta right there.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't think I'm like isolated in this, arc. One of the things was when I was making the hardware wallet, I was solving this like UX problem, but then I fully kind of internalized it's not just a seed phase problem. You solve the seed phase problem, you're going to run into a chain scaling problem.
Yeah, of course.
And then sort of these proposals of like L2 scaling, I think, fall down on their face very quickly when you start to look at, the security around it, the, capital fragmentation and liquidity issues around it, as well as just the parasitic nature. It's almost obvious at its proposal in terms of fees not coming back to the L1 to pay for security. So like when we're talking about sort of sustainable, scalable systems, you ultimately need security budgets to pay for the L1. And with any scrutiny of an L2 that's not like fully baked into the protocol of the L1, there's no mechanism by which you can get sufficient fees to sort of justify the existence of the L2 and pay for the security budget required on the L1. So like at that point, then like Ethereum started to like not make sense. And I started thinking about, how you can scale a proof of work system. So I came up with this idea that was very much like an engineering based idea, which I called block reduce. And the initial sort of insight was that as an engineer, you can scale a system like a database through sharding. You can know you can scale a distributed network in terms of increasing its throughput and latency and decreasing latency through subnetting. And then you can use the concept of merge mining to sort of tie this back together if you have a hierarchy of merge mine blockchains. After I came up with it, I did subsequently realize that my sort of architecture is very much akin to a proposal that Peter Todd made, I think about a year earlier when I came up with it, was called tree chains. But effectively it's tree chains. And if you have, tree chains in a proof of work setting, you can build scalable systems. So that's kind of where my journey started. Kind of just did it as a research project, had a Profit UT that I knew. And we eventually got a National Science Foundation grant and a couple students to do research on it. And then after a couple of years of that, one of the students managed to raise money with Polychain and started working full time on it.
Nice. So that's where Quai came from. Yeah. So you're probably going to get a lot of flack from the Cardano people about the most peer reviewed blockchain and all the competition over that.
Yeah, I mean, so I have a PhD. Once you go through a PhD, if like you're being honest with yourselves, you like understand that the academic process of peer review as well as just funding is a completely captured like mechanism of the state, and 99.9% of the time has nothing to do with reality or practical systems. There is potentially some value to peer review. I will say it is especially not good in the distributed system blockchain space because all of the innovation was practically done by open source contributors to these systems, and academic participants didn't publish anything until like 16, and then really in any degree of volume until like 19 and 20. So they're very late entrants, and the sort of assumptions that they bring to the tables and the models that they bring to the tables are very rudimentary. And because they think in those models, their understanding is like not as good as those that have practically built and implemented systems. So I would almost say your distributed system folks in academia are not as competent as the open source developers.
It's almost like they're cut out of, I'm sure there's a need for stuff like that at some point maybe, but it's kind of that people are already doing and experimenting in real time, and they've already analyze and solve the problems maybe in perfect world before you get a good research project on kind of figuring it out.
Yeah, I mean, we've gone through the process of doing peer-reviewed like security. So we have something called POEM, proof of entropy minima, right? We've done a security proof of it in a single chain setting. We've also done a paper talking about how using this concept of work shares in proof of work can create sort of optimal reward allocations and get you to Nash equilibrium. In that statement, you're also saying you're eliminating selfish mining withholding. So, we've done some of that with, academic co-authors. I will say I've had to teach them kind of the ideas over time, and then they put the formalism around it. But their line of thought in the theoretical context rubs against my sort of practical concepts, and they eventually understood it to the point that we could obviously like put it in a contract and write a paper of it. But that process of getting them to understand it was not simple.
It's unfortunate.
Yeah.
So really quick, would you mind just breaking down what exactly Quai is and how it works and the key value proposition, now that we've sort of padded like a big mountain of like contextual narrative behind that kind of key point?
Yeah, well, let me give like sort of the preface though about kind of where I see crypto right now. And I really see crypto as Bitcoin was this awesome thing that introduced proof of work, which sort of was like this first objective open mechanism for coordinating humans and transferring value. Unfortunately, in the interceding 10 years after that, people wanted to build systems quickly to like make a new feature and like print money. That was sort of like the guiding principle. And in that, they sacrificed many, if not all, of sort of the valuable properties of the distributed systems with introductions of things like proof of stake, distributed proof of stake, so on and so forth, not having privacy, not using a work-based mechanism. So like everyone was like looking for the fast dollar. In doing that, what we ended up creating was a system that is worse than the current money system from an individual point of privacy, liberty, and even usability in some ways.
So mostly, I guess that would talk about like the current like Ethereum, Solana type stuff while using stable coins to transact. That's kind of like the fulfillment of that indictment.
Yeah, well, I mean, really, they have built the thing that's most likely going to become the de facto CBDC if the name does not match the central bank. It's just because Circle is now Tether is the de facto issuer. It's just a different party. So like it doesn't fall under the definition of a CBDC, but functionally in its implementation, purpose, surveillance, and confiscatability, as well as creating the continuing dependence on the dollar and propping up the U.S. government and its debts. It fulfills all of those things. So it's a very bad situation. I think Satoshi, if he was alive, would not be happy with the state of affairs.
You don't think old Craig Wright's too happy about this? Gotta always give a little dig to old Craigans there. But yeah. So basically, that's sort of like a reverse engineering of answering the question, which is what is Quai? It's like not all those things.
Well, so the other path we have is that we have to go back to first principles to figure out how you can build a system that can act as a parallel monetary system that people will voluntarily adopt in their own self-interest and create something that is independent of the state.
Yeah.
Right? And that is the purpose of Quai. So we have like two paths. We will necessarily be in a digital age and we will necessarily use digital money, barring some, existential crisis or catastrophe.
The much hyped boomer EMP attack.
Right. So either we like keep going down the path of mainstream crypto and end up in a world of de facto CBDCs, or we can use first principles to design independent systems. And that really is what my point of Quai is to realize peer-to-peer digital cash. And in looking at that and looking at Bitcoin and looking at other systems, right, I was very thoughtful in sort of how to do it. So I used my mother as like the archetype, which is she needs to be able to use it like a debit card. Like that is her sort of accessibility to the system. So I need it to be a unified system. I need it to operate at scale, 50,000 plus transactions per second. I need it to give her a settlement guarantee in under 8 seconds. So then how do you design that system? So the hierarchy of merge mine blockchains is the first step. Creating a programmable EVM compatible deflationary token with Quai meets the requirement of a store value.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second token we call chi, or an energy dollar,
Mm-hmm.
fulfills the need for a unit of account and a medium of exchange. And so what chi does is basically it tokenizes hash in some ways. And with sort of a market mechanism and market design, you can get the price of that token to always approach the price of production or the cost of production, which is the cost of electricity. That's why we call it an energy dollar. The goal is you create a stablecoin alternative that has relatively consistent purchasing power with time, but is completely endogenous to the system. So you're not dependent on the dollar, you're not dependent on fiat, and you're not dependent on stables. And then the other property of chi is that it has privacy, and we get that at a scalable level by creating a fixed denomination, enforcing addressing non-reuse per block, making it so that you can break down transaction denominations, but reaggregation only happens in the sort of the first mine transaction in the block. So there's like limited sort of ability to reaggregate. So you create an incentive to do it, say, through a merchant or potentially cooperatively. So there's nothing sort of implicit in that system, but the aggregate properties create something that gets you cash-like privacy.
Yeah.
And it does it at scale. So we actually like surveyed sort of all the different ways you could go about this. You know, confidential transactions, ring signatures, membership proofs. And our assessment was that if you wanted to function at cash-like scales, the only way to do this was through this sort of compendium of things around fixed denominations, because all of the other techniques were too computationally and cryptographically expensive.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why we chose that strategy. So what we think you can do with Quai is create that truly parallel monetary system where you have a risk-on asset, Quai. You can do programmable DeFi in it. You ideally have what you might consider a risk-off asset in Chi, and that you buy it and maintains your purchasing power with time. And then you also have that medium of exchange with it, which is I have privacy. So instead of having to go risk on into crypto and risk off into dollars, you can just defect into crypto, go
The
risk
whole
on
way,
with Quai and risk off with Chi, and sort of never have to come back.
Yeah. It's probably a pretty complicated process, but is there like a high level summary of how the chi value gets pegged, like the mechanism that keeps it kind of at the value that it is?
Yeah, so there's two mechanisms, and there's no pegs, which is like important because like pegs
are guaranteed.
Pegs implies instability, it implies debt, and it implies the concept of a negative funding rate. So there's no pegs. But there's two mechanisms in the system. One is chi is issued proportional to hash. Quai is issued proportional to the log of hash. So chi then should always sort of, with the first mechanism, if the price of chi is above the cost of producing chi, miners will choose to mine chi over Quai and then sell at market up into the point that the price converges to the cost. That's like mechanism one.
It's like auto sold that way.
Well, they can hold it, they can sell it, but fundamentally, if I increase supply in the market, it's going to cause price to drop until, in a competitive process, it converges to your cost of production.
Yeah.
Or, you know, some marginal profit relative to your cost of production. So that's mechanism one. Mechanism two is, let's say there's too much chi in the market. So somebody overmined it, or you know, there was a shock to demand because it got delisted or whatever it may be. The second mechanism then is you have to take up supply out of the market. So we have a conversion mechanism that's offered by the protocol that allows you to convert Quai to Chi or Chi to Quai at a protocol determined rate. And that is done using a controller. And the goal of the controller is to adjust the offered rate until the market becomes neutral to the rate offered. Okay, so if I look at sort of the historic, say, day or couple days worth of transactions, if, you know, the amount of Quai going to Chi and Chi going to Quai is in balance, that means the market is neutral, which then means the protocol offered rate matches the external market rate.
Okay.
So you're using the market participants as an oracle, if you will, and their behaviors to figure out like the appropriate rate between the two assets.
Yeah. So I know it's not really a popular thing. It may be libertarian type circles to say, but it's almost like trade surplus versus deficit to be able to determine if there is a surplus or deficit that kind of adjusts the rate.
Yeah, I mean, that's one way to think about it. It's just market participants are good oracles in some ways, and so if I let the market tell me that, I don't create like a centralized oracleized dependency. I just respond to the aggregate incentives of efficient market participants, which like gives me the best indicator of the market behavior and pricing. Is kind of how I think about it. Now, one of the other properties though is the reason this works. One of the reasons it works is because Quai is meant to have relatively inelastic supply. So it's issued relative to the log of hash, right? Chi is issued proportional to hash. So Chi is actually meant to have very elastic quantity of supply and have a very inelastic price. Quai is meant to have inelastic quantity of supply, but then elastic pricing. So that's how you get your sort of deflationary, characteristic with time. But, Chi, basically the market participants, either miners or speculators, as the price of Chi varies from its production costs, can end up making money by getting that variation to close. So very simply, for market participants, they see this internal market and they see like an external market and they just arb it. And that activity of arbing it adjusts the supply until the markets converge, which then means Chi always becomes produced in the quantity where supply matches demand.
Yeah. Now it just, a question that sounds like it's missing a point, but it's just as a side thing. What's been kind of the dollar price of Chi over the lifetime of the blockchain? Like, have you seen it be very volatile in the dollar thing? Has it been pretty stable? Like, around what price does it tend to be? Does Chi?
So
forgetting Quai, but just Chi.
We don't have great data on that yet because it's very early still, right? So the blockchain went live beginning of January. Transaction turned on mid-January, and then Chi turned on like 10 days ago.
Oh, wow.
And then Chi.
So we literally have the data point of like what is someone sold one for right now?
Well, no. So we have a blockchain maturity of 2 weeks, or a Coinbase maturity of 2 weeks, which also means we have a conversion maturity of 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So sort of in this system of being able to convert Quai for Chi, you need duration to make this like mechanism work correctly. And so that's where this like 2 week factor comes in. So the gas for Chi like hasn't turned on. Well, it's turned on technically, but no one has movable Chi yet. So we don't actually know like what the price of discovery is, but in terms of what it is in terms of hashes, it's around $1.
Yeah.
So like it takes you about $1 worth of hash to produce a Chi.
Yeah.
And we'll see how the stability aspect goes. I will say early on, you would expect the greatest degree of instability, and as you get more liquidity and a greater number of educated market participants, you would expect less and less variation in the pricing of Chi relative to the cost of production. So as the market gets bigger, it will track better. So early on is the most volatile time in expectation.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So just to sort of wrap this thing up, what is your product roadmap kind of idea? So like the little bit of context of that, obviously, there's so many blockchains and they all can do so many different things. And I was actually having a discussion with some of the people in the Multiverse X, formerly Elrond community about this, about, oh, everyone loves the tech of the blockchain, but then what do you actually do with it? And then the answers are, well, the same things you can do with like Ethereum or Solana, but there's not something that sticks out as far as like a product. Like if you want to get someone excited at, like, for example, Liberty Forum is not a crypto conference, but there's people who believe in crypto ideas, but then you're trying to say, Rando who talks says, oh, I love this idea. What do I do? And what kinds of things are you focusing on in the next few years? Like, let's say an end user app or something like that that are really going to start to anticipate really start to take off?
Yeah. So our perspective is you need to solve a problem for a user that like has a burning problem today, right? Um, and the one that I think is most pertinent to talk about is just the use case is money. And there's a lot of people in a number of countries that have had hyperinflating nation state currencies that have turned to crypto as a mechanism to escape that.
Yeah.
They've actually tried to adopt crypto transactionally to buy goods and services. And the problem that they have experienced is when they adopt them and they start using them, there's not enough throughput on chain, causes the prices to go up, and they sort of can't use them transactionally anymore. So, Buenos Aires is a great example of this, and that they originally tried to use BSC with USDT to like buy goods and services as the Argentine peso was hyperinflating. But fees on BSC went up, so they moved over to Tron. Same thing happened. And now basically everyone in Argentina sort of uses crypto as an offshore bank account, and they still have to convert to and from physical pesos to like buy stuff in the economy. So I think those are ready participants that would benefit from having a currency that has stable value that they can actually use transactionally.
Yeah.
I think other locations like that are Nigeria, Turkey, parts of India and the Philippines. So our concept is thinking about this like an Uber model, where instead of trying to say we're going to be payments globally, you focus on a very specific area and try to get that critical mass where you have enough merchants and enough users that you get to the point that people are actually using it. And the interesting thing is if you were to succeed in like Istanbul and you got, say, 30% of the population to use it, you would end up being bigger than all of crypto combined just with that like small percentage of one city like using crypto transactionally. So like the money game, I believe, is where the value is and where all value will eventually come from and go to in crypto. And you can kind of see that by the size of the relative like transaction throughput and user base of just getting, a fractional city. Now, the other one I would also say is a very interesting one is because we are scalable, our transaction pricing is sort of fixed with time. So most other chains sort of have pricing markets which cause transaction prices to rise because they have fixed throughput. Our system dynamically adds shards if shards fill. So kind of there's this other interesting thing, which is when people adopt crypto into a traditional business, they don't have good pricing of their transactions. They can vary by 100 or 1,000x, which impugns the usefulness of crypto against their business model. But sort of saying you can do transfers for like half a penny today, half a penny tomorrow, and half a penny in 5 years makes a much more usable system in a Web 2 business where they're just trying to do some form of payment or like trying to leverage some property of the blockchain that they like, but they need cost guarantees and accessibility guarantees just relative to fees. So those are kind of like the two user classes that I think are most ripe for a system like ours. And that's kind of what we're, trying to approach first.
Yeah, perfect. Where would you direct people to find more about both yourself, your own personal work, but also Quai?
Yeah, so you can go to qu.ai, just Quai.
That's a good URL.
Right?
I like it.
You like that one?
Yeah.
And then my Twitter, you can follow me. It's Mechanical K, K-A-L-K at the end on Twitter. We have a bunch of docs. It's a mined system. We have, if you want to use GPUs, you can run your own node. We have a bunch of pools that are supported. If you don't have GPUs, we're actually integrated with like a number of cloud providers. You can do one-click deploys and mine tokens that way. And then you can also participate in developing applications, EVM compatible, uses, Solidity and kind of that normal, set of tool chains. So lots of ways to participate, build applications. We have a, strong community of 60 different dApps and apps that are like built on the chain that like people can use and explore. So burgeoning early ecosystem, but, hopefully what we've constructed, ideally can create that sustainable parallel monetary system and separate money from the state, which
should be why we're all here.
At least why I got into it.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Well, thanks very much for chatting. It was a good one.
Yeah. Appreciate it, man.
Cool.